The morning Marcus Williams woke up to silence was the morning he knew the world had gone straight to hell. No cars honking, no neighbors arguing, no dogs barking, just this heavy, dead quiet that pressed against his eardrums like water at the bottom of a pool. He'd been holed up in his apartment for 3 days, rationing the half-empty box of crackers and warm soda he'd grabbed during the initial panic, watching the news until the broadcasts turned to static, then watching that static like it might suddenly start making sense again. It didn't. Nothing did anymore. The zombie outbreak that started as a joke on social media, then a conspiracy theory, then a genuine emergency, had torn through the city faster than wildfire through dry brush. Now, as Marcus pressed his face against the grimy window of his third-floor walk-up, he could see them, the infected, the turned, the dead but not dead, shuffling through the streets below like broken puppets with cut strings barely holding them upright. Marcus was a mechanic before the world ended, a regular guy who fixed transmissions and changed oil, who grabbed beers with buddies on Friday nights and complained about his landlord raising the rent. He wasn't built for this apocalypse stuff, wasn't some military hero or survivalist nut with a bunker full of supplies. He was just a 32-year-old dude from Detroit who suddenly had to figure out how not to become a flesh-eating monster. The thing that got him moving, that pulled him away from the relative safety of his apartment, was the voice crackling through his dead phone that somehow powered on for just a minute. It was a recorded message looping on some emergency frequency, a woman's voice saying there was a safe zone, a real honest-to-God refugee camp set up at the old manufacturing district near the river. She gave coordinates, gave directions, said they had walls and food and actual living people. The message cut out before repeating, and Marcus's phone died again, but that was enough. That sliver of hope was enough to get him off his couch and into his work boots. He packed light because he didn't have much worth taking, a backpack with the remaining crackers, 2 bottles of water he'd filled from the tap before the pressure stopped, a flashlight, a screwdriver set, and a tire iron from his truck that he'd grabbed from the parking garage yesterday. The garage had been a nightmare, full of shadows and that god-awful moaning sound the infected made, like air escaping from a punctured lung. He'd seen Mrs. Patterson from 2B down there, or what used to be Mrs. Patterson, her floral dress covered in dried blood and her eyes milky white, no recognition when she'd turned toward the sound of his footsteps. Marcus had run, pure and simple, grabbed the tire iron from his Ford's bed and booked it back upstairs. Now that tire iron felt like the only thing between him and becoming one of them. He gave his apartment one last look, the sagging couch, the TV with the cracked screen, the photos on the fridge of him and his sister at her graduation, then stepped into the hallway and pulled the door shut behind him. No point locking it. Nothing worth stealing, and the dead didn't bother with doorknobs anyway. The stairwell smelled like death and something worse, something sweet and rotten that made Marcus breathe through his mouth. He took each step careful and quiet, tire iron raised, ears straining for any sound of movement. 3rd floor clear. 2nd floor had a streak of blood across the wall that hadn't been there yesterday, but no bodies, no infected. 1st floor was where things got dicey. The main entrance was just a busted door hanging off its hinges, and through it Marcus could see the street, could see at least a dozen of those things wandering aimless in the morning light. They looked worse in the sunshine somehow, more obviously wrong, skin the color of spoiled meat, movements jerky and unnatural, clothes hanging off them like they'd shrunk inside their own bodies. Marcus pressed himself against the stairwell wall and forced his breathing to slow down. Panic would get him killed faster than anything else. He needed to think, needed a strategy, needed to use his head for once instead of just reacting. The back exit, he decided. Every apartment building had a back way out, usually led to an alley or the dumpsters. His building's rear door opened onto a narrow alley that connected to Maple Street, which if he remembered right, ran parallel to the main road for about 6 blocks before hitting the industrial area. It wasn't a straight shot to the manufacturing district, but it'd keep him off the major streets where the infected seemed to cluster. Marcus crept through the 1st floor hallway, past apartment doors he'd never knocked on, past the mailboxes that would never be filled again, past the superintendent's office where old Mr. Kowalski had sat doing crossword puzzles every single day for 20 years. The back door was solid metal, thank God, and still locked from the inside. Marcus's hands shook as he turned the deadbolt. The click sounded like a gunshot in the silence, and eased the door open just enough to peek through. The alley was clear except for an overturned dumpster and about 1,000,000 pieces of trash scattered everywhere. Marcus slipped through and let the door close behind him with a soft thud. The morning air was cold, way too cold for September, and it carried that same sweet rot smell from the stairwell. He tried not to think about what was causing it, tried not to imagine bodies decomposing in apartments and houses across the whole damn city. Instead, he focused on the mouth of the alley 20 yards ahead, on putting one foot in front of the other, on gripping the tire irons so hard his knuckles went white. He was almost to Maple Street when he heard the shuffling behind him, that distinctive drag step of an infected's messed up walk. Marcus didn't turn around, didn't freeze, he just ran like hell. Maple Street was worse than he'd hoped and better than he'd feared. There were infected, sure, but they were spread out, not the massive crowd that clogged the main avenue. Marcus could see a path, could see gaps between the shuffling bodies that he might be able to navigate if he kept moving and stayed quiet. But quiet went out the window when the infected from the alley, a man in a security uniform with half his face missing, stumbled onto the street and let out a shriek that sounded like metal tearing. Every dead head in a 3-block radius turned toward the sound, turned toward Marcus. That was when he learned something important about the infected. They weren't just mindless wanderers. When one of them spotted prey, spotted something living and breathing, they all seemed to know. Like a hive mind or a pack of wolves, they responded, started moving together toward the same target. Toward him. Marcus ran harder than he'd ever run in his life, his work boots slapping pavement, backpack bouncing against his spine, tire iron clutched in one fist. Behind him, the moaning grew louder as more infected joined the chase, that horrible chorus of dead voices that didn't sound human anymore. He dodged around a parked car, jumped over a fire hydrant, nearly wiped out on a slick of something he didn't want to identify. A woman in a nurse's uniform lurched out from between two buildings and Marcus swung without thinking, the tire iron connecting with her skull with a wet crunch that he felt all the way up his arm. She dropped and he kept running, guilt and horror churning in his gut because that used to be a person, used to be someone who saved lives, and now she was just another obstacle between him and survival. 6 blocks felt like 6 miles, but finally Marcus spotted the industrial area ahead, big warehouse buildings with metal siding, chain-link fences, loading docks. The manufacturing district where the message said sanctuary waited. He risked a glance back and immediately wished he hadn't. There had to be 30 or 40 infected chasing him now, a whole crowd of them, some running with that weird sprinting lurch that the fresher ones could manage, others shambling as fast as their rotted legs could carry them. Marcus's lungs burned and his legs felt like rubber, but the fence was right there, just 50 more yards, 40, 30. He could see movement on the other side, could see actual living people on a catwalk above the main gate, could see someone pointing at him and shouting something he couldn't hear over the blood pounding in his ears. The gate started rolling open when Marcus was 20 yards out, just wide enough for a person to slip through, and he put everything he had left into one final sprint. He dove through the gap with inches to spare, hit the ground inside and rolled, heard the gate slam shut behind him and the crash of bodies hitting chain link as the infected horde collided with the fence. Hands grabbed him, living hands, warm hands, and hauled him to his feet. Marcus found himself staring at a guy about his age with a shaved head and a shotgun, a teenage girl with purple streaks in her hair and a baseball bat, and an older woman in construction gear holding what looked like a homemade spear. They were all looking at him like they couldn't quite believe he'd made it, and honestly, Marcus couldn't quite believe it either. "You bit?" the bald guy asked, and his tone made it clear this was the only question that mattered. Marcus shook his head, too winded to speak, and held out his arms to show clean skin. The guy nodded to the woman with the spear, who stepped forward and did a quick but thorough check, looking at Marcus's neck, his arms, even making him lift his shirt to show his torso. "He's clean, Jake," she announced, and the tension in the group eased slightly. Jake, the bald guy, lowered his shotgun and offered Marcus a hand. "Jake Rodriguez," he said. "Welcome to Fort Ironside, population 73. 74 now, I guess." Marcus shook his hand, still catching his breath. "Marcus Williams. That message on the emergency frequency, that was real? You guys actually got a safe zone here?" Jake's expression flickered with something, pride maybe, or just grim satisfaction. "Real as it gets these days, brother. Come on, I'll take you to meet the boss. She'll want to hear how bad it is out there." He led Marcus away from the gate, which was already being reinforced by two guys with welding equipment, sparks flying as they added another layer of metal bars. Marcus looked around as they walked, taking in Fort Ironside with a mix of relief and amazement. The survivors had set up inside what looked like an old auto parts manufacturing plant, a sprawling complex of connected buildings surrounded by a patchwork fence made of chain link, sheet metal, and what appeared to be stripped-down cars welded together. Catwalks and watchtowers had been constructed at intervals, with armed guards keeping watch. Inside the main yard, people were actually doing things, working, talking, living. There was a garden plot where someone was tending vegetables, a table where a man was cleaning rifles, a cooking area with a fire going and the smell of something that almost resembled real food. "We've been building this place for about 2 weeks, Jake explained as they walked. Got lucky that the factory still had power from some solar panels the old owners installed. Got water from a well on the property. Ain't exactly the Hilton, but it beats being zombie chow." Marcus nodded, still taking it all in. 74 people. 74 human beings who'd survived whatever hell happened out there and made it here. It felt like winning the lottery and finding out the prize was just getting to see another sunrise. Jake led him to the main factory floor, a cavernous space that had been converted into a kind of town square. The assembly line equipment had been pushed to the sides, and in the cleared center, people had set up living areas, sleeping bags, camping tents, even a few actual cots. At the far end, near what used to be the foreman's office, a group was gathered around a table covered in maps and papers. The woman who looked up when Jake approached was maybe 50, with steel gray hair pulled back in a bun and the kind of face that said she didn't have time for nonsense even before the world ended. She wore military-style cargo pants and a leather jacket, and when she stood, Marcus noticed she had a pistol holstered at her hip and a knife strapped to her thigh. "Found this one outside, Colonel," Jake said, and the woman's sharp eyes swept over Marcus in assessment. "He made it through the swarm on Maple. Clean, not bit." The Colonel, Marcus didn't know if that was a real rank or just what people called her, extended a hand. Colonel Bethany Morrison, formerly of the Army Corps of Engineers, currently the closest thing this place has to leadership. "You got a name, son?" "Marcus Williams, ma'am. I'm a mechanic from Detroit. Got your message on the emergency frequency." Morrison nodded, a slight smile touching her lips. "That recording was my idea. Figured if we're building something here, we might as well let other survivors know." "You military?" Marcus shook his head. "No ma'am, just a regular guy who fixes cars." Morrison's smile widened. "A mechanic. That's perfect. We've got vehicles but nobody who really knows their way around an engine. You just became a valuable asset, Marcus Williams." She gestured to the table. "Let me show you what we're dealing with, and then we'll find you a bunk and get some food in you. But first, I need to know, how bad is it out there? The last supply run we did was 3 days ago, and the city was already looking pretty overrun." Marcus moved to the table and looked at the maps spread across it. Someone had marked the industrial district in blue marker and drawn a perimeter around Fort Ironside. Beyond that, most of the city was marked in red, infected zones. It's bad, Marcus said quietly. Real bad. I didn't see any other survivors on my way here. Just them. And they're not as dumb as you'd think. When one of them spotted me, they all came running, like they were coordinating or something. Morrison exchanged glances with the others around the table, a young guy with glasses and a laptop somehow still running, a muscular woman with a firefighter's jacket, an older man with a hunting rifle. We've noticed that too, the woman in the firefighter's jacket said. They're learning, or remembering, or something. The fresh ones especially, they can problem solve, use tools. We saw one open a car door last week. That sent a chill down Marcus's spine. Zombies that could think, even a little bit, were exponentially more dangerous than the shambling corpses from the movies. So what's the plan? He asked. We just gonna wait here until they forget about us or die off naturally? Morrison shook her head. Waiting isn't a strategy, it's a death sentence. We've got supplies for maybe another month if we ration carefully. After that, we'll have to venture out for food, medicine, fuel. But I've got something else in mind, something bigger. She pointed to a spot on the map about 10 miles north of their position. There's a National Guard armory up here. Before communications went down completely, I heard chatter that they'd activated and stocked it for emergency operations. If we could get there, get inside, we'd have access to real weapons, ammunition, maybe even medical supplies and MREs that could last us months. The guy with glasses, who introduced himself as Tommy Baker, former IT specialist, pulled up something on his laptop. I've been monitoring radio frequencies, and there's still some automated systems broadcasting. The armory's security system is one of them. It's locked down tight, biometric scanners and everything, but if we could get to the command terminal inside, I could probably bypass it. Marcus looked at the map, calculating distances and routes. 10 miles through a city full of infected. It seemed impossible, suicidal even. But Morrison was right, sitting still wasn't an option. You'd need vehicles, he said slowly, his mechanic's brain starting to work the problem. Fast ones, tough ones. Something that could punch through a crowd if it had to. And you'd need them running perfect, no breakdowns, no stalls. Morrison's eyes lit up. That's where you come in, Marcus. We've got vehicles, a couple of trucks, an old school bus, even an armored bank truck that someone drove here. But nobody who knows how to keep them running. Marcus nodded slowly, the shape of a plan forming in his mind. I can do that. I can get them running and keep them running. But we'd need more than just good vehicles. We'd need a route, distractions, a backup plan. The muscular woman, Lisa Patterson, former firefighter, grinned. Now you're thinking like a survivor. Welcome to the team, Marcus. Over the next few days, Marcus threw himself into work like a man possessed. The garage area of the manufacturing plant became his domain, and he cataloged every vehicle Fort Ironside had, 2 pickup trucks in decent shape, 1 panel van with a busted transmission he could fix, the armored bank truck that was built like a tank but got terrible mileage, and the school bus that had potential if they could reinforce it properly. Morrison gave him a team, a kid named Derek Thompson who was maybe 19 and had worked at an auto shop before the outbreak, and Amanda Foster, a woman in her 40s who'd been a construction worker and knew her way around welding equipment. Together, they started transforming the vehicles from regular civilian transportation into something that could survive the apocalypse. The pickup trucks got reinforced bumpers made from steel pipes, grills welded over the windows to prevent infected from breaking through, and Marcus rebuilt their engines to squeeze out every bit of speed and power. The panel van took the most work, the transmission was shot, and finding parts meant scavenging from the other wrecked vehicles scattered around the compound. Marcus spent 12 hours one day elbow-deep in grease and metal, but by the end, he had the van purring like a kitten, smooth and reliable. The armored truck was already tough, but they added spikes to the front bumper and Amanda welded metal plates to protect the tires. And the bus, Marcus's personal masterpiece, they turned into a rolling fortress. Metal sheets covered the windows except for narrow slits to see through, the front became a wedge-shaped plow that could push obstacles aside, and Derek had the idea to add noisemakers to the back, car alarms and air horns that could draw infected away from other vehicles. While Marcus worked on vehicles, the rest of Fort Ironside prepared for the mission. Jake Rodriguez ran combat drills, teaching people who'd never held a gun how to shoot straight, how to move in formation, how to watch each other's backs. Lisa Patterson organized supply lists and inventory, figuring out exactly what they needed from the armory and what they could carry. Tommy Baker hacked together a communications system using walkie-talkies and an old CB radio, giving the team a way to coordinate during the run. And Morrison planned the route, studying maps, marking alternate paths, identifying choke points and danger zones. She was a natural leader, the kind of person who could stay calm when everything went sideways, and Marcus found himself trusting her judgment even though he'd only known her a few days. The night before the mission, Morrison called a meeting in the main hall. All 74 survivors gathered, men, women, kids, old folks, every single person who'd made it to Fort Ironside. The firelight from the cooking area cast flickering shadows on the walls, and for a moment, Marcus could almost pretend things were normal, like this was just a community gathering instead of a council of war. Morrison stood on a makeshift platform, a couple of pallets stacked up, and looked out at her people. "Tomorrow, we're making a supply run to the National Guard Armory," she announced, her voice carrying across the space. "It's dangerous, maybe the most dangerous thing we've done since the outbreak. But if we succeed, we'll have enough supplies to survive for months, maybe longer. Long enough to figure out what comes next." A murmur ran through the crowd, fear and hope mixed together. An older man, someone Marcus had seen working in the garden, raised his hand. "Who's going? You ain't risking everyone, right?" Morrison shook her head. "No. It'll be a small team in 3 vehicles. Me, Jake Rodriguez, Marcus Williams, Tommy Baker, Lisa Patterson, Derek Thompson, and Amanda Foster. 7 people. The rest of you will stay here, keep Fort Ironside secure. If something happens to us, if we don't make it back, you'll still have this place, still have a chance." The weight of that hung in the air. They were the backup plan, the insurance policy, the hope that humanity would continue even if the mission team died. A woman holding a small child spoke up. "Why should we trust this plan? Why not just stay here, stay safe?" It was Morrison's answer that showed Marcus why she was the leader. "Because there's no such thing as safe anymore," she said simply. "We can hide behind these walls for a month, maybe 2, but eventually, supplies run out. Eventually, the infected break through or we get sick or something else goes wrong. This mission gives us a chance at more than just surviving day to day. It gives us a chance to build something that lasts." The woman nodded slowly, and Marcus saw the same acceptance on faces throughout the room. They were scared, but they understood. In this new world, you either took risks or you slowly died. Marcus barely slept that night. He laid in his assigned bunk, a cot in the corner near the garage, and stared at the ceiling, thinking about tomorrow, about all the ways things could go wrong. They could get overrun by infected. The vehicles could break down. The armory could be empty or destroyed. They could die, plain and simple, and Fort Ironside would be down 7 people it couldn't afford to lose. But they could also succeed. They could come back heroes, loaded with supplies, giving everyone here a real shot at survival. Marcus rolled over and tried to find sleep, tried to quiet his racing mind. Tomorrow would come whether he was ready or not. Dawn broke gray and cold, the kind of morning that felt like the world couldn't decide between rain and just staying miserable. The mission team gathered in the garage, checking weapons, loading supplies, running through the plan one last time. Marcus did a final inspection of each vehicle, checking fluid levels, tire pressure, making sure everything was as perfect as he could make it. The pickup trucks would go first and last, Jake driving the lead truck with Morrison riding shotgun, Amanda driving the rear truck with Derek on weapons. The armored bank truck in the middle would carry Tommy and his computer equipment, driven by Lisa, who'd volunteered because she had experience with heavy vehicles from the fire department. Marcus would drive the panel van, which would stay back at Fort Ironside as backup in case something went wrong and they needed extraction. Wait, what? Marcus said when Morrison explained this part. "I'm not going." The colonel shook her head. "You're too valuable here, Marcus. If something happens to the mission team, this place needs a mechanic who can keep the remaining vehicles running. You're staying." Marcus wanted to argue, wanted to say he hadn't worked his butt off for 3 days just to sit on the sidelines, but he saw the logic. And more than that, he saw the worry in Morrison's eyes, the acknowledgement that this mission might be one way. She was protecting the future by keeping him back. "Fine," he said quietly. "But you bring everyone home, you hear me? I didn't tune up these trucks just to have them come back full of bullet holes." Morrison actually smiled at that. "We'll do our best. Keep the fort, Marcus. And if we're not back by nightfall." She trailed off, leaving the rest unsaid. If they weren't back by nightfall, they probably weren't coming back at all. The team loaded into the vehicles, engines rumbling to life, Marcus's repairs holding strong. The main gate began to roll open, and Marcus joined the other survivors gathered to watch them go. The infected that had been clustering around the fence shambled forward, drawn by the noise, but the lead truck punched through them like they were made of paper. The armored truck followed, and Amanda's rear guard brought up the tail, and then they were gone, disappearing down the road toward the city center and the armory beyond. The hours that followed were the longest of Marcus's life. He tried to keep busy, checking the remaining vehicles, organizing tools, helping in the garden, anything to keep his mind off the mission. The other survivors were just as anxious, jumping at every sound, constantly checking the walls for infected. Tommy had left one of his radio setups behind, tuned to the frequency the team was using, and it sat on a table in the main hall broadcasting static. Morrison had said they'd maintain radio silence unless there was an emergency or they reached the armory, so the static was actually a good sign. No news was good news. But it still felt like torture, listening to that endless hiss and waiting for voices that might never come. Around noon, one of the watchtower guards, a guy named Peter something, called down that there was movement on the south side. Marcus grabbed his tire iron and joined the response team, a group of survivors with weapons ready. They climbed up to the catwalk and looked where Peter was pointing. A group of infected, maybe 20 strong, shambling down the road toward Fort Ironside. Not a huge threat, but not nothing either. "They drawn by the vehicles leaving?" someone asked. Marcus shook his head. "Maybe, or maybe they're just wandering. Either way, we can't let them cluster at the fence. Eventually, enough of them pile up, the fence comes down." Lisa Patterson, no wait, she was on the mission. Another woman, someone Marcus didn't know well, took charge. "We thinned them out before they reached the walls. Rifles on the catwalk, make every shot count. Don't waste ammo." The group spread out, experienced shooters taking position while others like Marcus stood ready in case any infected got too close. The first shots rang out, echoing across the compound, and infected started dropping. Headshots, clean and efficient, the kind of shooting that came from practice and desperation. Within 10 minutes, the threat was neutralized, bodies lying still on the road. But the gunfire would draw more, Marcus knew. Sound carried, and the infected followed sound like moths to flame. "Double the watch," the woman in charge ordered. "And someone get those bodies cleared before they attract more." It was a grim task, but necessary. The new world required grim tasks. The radio crackled to life at 2:47 p.m., and Marcus practically sprinted to the main hall when he heard the commotion. Tommy Baker's voice came through, distorted by static but understandable. "Fort Ironside, this is Baker. We've reached the armory. Situation is complicated. Place is locked down tight, and there's maybe 100 infected in the parking lot. We're gonna try to draw them off with the bus's noisemakers, then make entry through the loading dock. Stand by." The radio went silent again, and everyone in the hall looked at each other with expressions mixing hope and fear. They'd made it to the armory. That was huge. But 100 infected was a serious problem, even for vehicles as tough as Marcus had built them. Marcus found himself narrating what was probably happening, both to inform the others and to calm his own nerves. Okay, so they'll use the bus to pull the infected away from the main building. Those air horns and alarms will drive the dead crazy, get them chasing after the noise. Meanwhile, the 2 trucks and the armored vehicle will make for the loading dock. Tommy said he could hack the security terminal from inside, so they just need to get in, get to the command center, and unlock the storage areas. A young girl, maybe 12, looked up at him with wide eyes. Will they make it? Marcus forced confidence into his voice. They'll make it. I built those vehicles tough, and Morrison's team is tougher. They'll make it. He hoped he sounded more certain than he felt. 30 minutes passed. 45. An hour. The radio stayed silent, and Marcus's imagination filled that silence with every worst-case scenario. Infected overwhelming the team. Vehicles breaking down despite his best work. Someone getting bit, turning, attacking the others. The armory being empty or destroyed. He was pacing the main hall like a caged animal when the radio finally crackled again. Morrison's voice this time, calm and professional. Fort Ironside, this is Morrison. We're inside the armory. Tommy's accessing the system now. The place is fully stocked, weapons, ammo, medical supplies, food, water purification tablets, even some solar chargers and radio equipment. This is the jackpot, folks. We're gonna need help loading, though. Is the backup van ready? Marcus grabbed the radio handset. This is Marcus. Van's ready, I'm ready. You need extraction? A pause, then Morrison replied. Negative on extraction. We've secured the armory, cleared the infected inside. But we've got way more supplies than 3 vehicles can carry in one trip. I'm thinking we make this a forward base, run relays back and forth until we've moved everything worth taking. Can you bring the van and maybe 4 volunteers who can help load? Marcus looked around the hall at the eager faces. Everyone wanted to help, wanted to be part of the success. He picked 3 strong-looking guys and 1 woman who'd been a nurse and might recognize medical supplies. I'm on my way with a crew. Sit tight. The drive to the armory was tense but uneventful. Marcus followed the route Morrison had planned, avoiding the main streets, taking residential roads where the infected presence was lighter. His crew stayed alert, watching out the reinforced windows, calling out any threats. They passed through neighborhoods that looked frozen in time, breakfast tables still set with rotting food, cars abandoned in driveways, a kid's bike lying on its side in a yard. Evidence of lives interrupted, of people who'd fled or died or turned. Marcus forced himself not to think about it, to focus on driving, on navigating the obstacles. The armory was a squat concrete building surrounded by chain-link fence topped with razor wire, the kind of place built to withstand attacks. The gate was open now, and Marcus could see the 3 mission vehicles parked near the loading dock, exactly as planned. Bodies of infected littered the parking lot, the team had definitely been busy. Marcus pulled the van up to the dock and his crew piled out, greeted by an exhausted but triumphant mission team. Morrison clasped his shoulder. Good to see you, Marcus. Come check this out. She led him inside, and Marcus's jaw dropped. The armory was a treasure trove. Racks of rifles, cases of ammunition, medical supplies still in sealed boxes, pallets of MREs, water containers, tactical gear, even some explosives in a locked cage. Tommy was at a computer terminal, pulling up inventory lists and printing them on a miraculously working printer. The National Guard was prepping for full mobilization when things went south, he explained. They never got the chance to deploy, so everything's still here. I'm talking enough supplies for 100 people for 6 months, maybe longer if we're smart about it. Marcus walked between the aisles, mind racing with possibilities. With this kind of firepower and supplies, Fort Ironside could become a real settlement, a place where people could rebuild instead of just survive. They worked until dark, loading vehicles with prioritized supplies, medical first, then food and water, then weapons and ammunition. Even with 4 vehicles and multiple trips to the trucks, they barely made a dent in the armory's inventory. Morrison made the call around dusk. We're setting up a guard rotation here tonight. Half the team stays and secures the building, half returns to Fort Ironside with the first load. Tomorrow, we bring more people and more vehicles, and we strip this place to the studs. It was risky, splitting the team, but the armory was too valuable to leave unguarded. Marcus volunteered to stay, and Morrison accepted, assigning him, Derek, and Amanda to the night shift while she led Jake, Lisa, and Tommy back with the supplies. That night in the armory was quiet but eerie. Marcus and his two companions took turns on watch, two sleeping while one kept an eye on the security monitors Tommy had reactivated. The cameras showed the parking lot and the surrounding streets, empty except for the occasional infected wandering past. Around 2 a.m., during Marcus's watch shift, he saw something that made him sit up straight. A group of infected, not shambling randomly, but moving together, deliberately, like they had a purpose. They passed by the armory without stopping, heading northeast in a loose formation. Marcus counted at least 50 of them, maybe more in the darkness. When Derek relieved him at 4 a.m., Marcus mentioned what he'd seen. The kid frowned. "You think they're migrating or something? Going somewhere specific?" Marcus shrugged. "I don't know, man. But they weren't acting like the random zombies we usually see. They were moving like a group with a destination." It was a troubling thought. If the infected were organizing, even instinctively, that changed everything. It meant they weren't just a threat you could avoid by being quiet and careful. It meant they might be hunting, planning, evolving. Derek promised to mention it to Morrison when she returned, and Marcus tried to get some sleep on one of the cots they'd set up in the break room. Morning came with the rumble of engines. Morrison was back with a convoy, the original mission vehicles plus the panel van, the school bus, and even a couple of pickup trucks from survivors who'd volunteered their personal vehicles. She brought 20 people this time, ready to work. "We're gonna empty this place today," she announced. "Everything that's not bolted down comes with us. We've got a good thing going, but we need to move fast. I don't want to push our luck." Marcus told her about the group of infected he'd seen moving past in the night, and her expression grew serious. "How many?" she asked. 50, maybe more. Moving together, northeast." Morrison pulled out her map and traced a line northeast from the armory. "That's toward the river. There's an old meatpacking district there, lots of buildings. Maybe they're drawn to something, or maybe..." She trailed off, thinking. "Maybe what?" Marcus prompted. "Maybe they're being drawn. We've heard rumors on the radio, other survivor groups talking about herds, massive concentrations of infected moving together. Some people think there's a source, something or someone controlling them." Marcus felt a chill. "Like a hive mind?" Morrison shrugged. "Maybe. Or maybe just pheromones or instinct or something we don't understand yet. Point is, if there's a herd forming near here, we need to finish up and get back to Fort Ironside before we're caught between them and home." That lit a fire under everyone. The loading went from efficient to frantic, people hauling boxes and crates and relay lines, vehicles getting packed until their suspensions groaned. By noon, they'd cleared about 70% of the armory's supplies. Morrison made the call to take what they had and abandon the rest. "It's not worth the risk," she said, though Marcus could see it pained her to leave anything behind. The convoy formed up, the school bus in front as a battering ram, the armored truck and both pickups in the middle loaded with supplies, and Marcus's panel van bringing up the rear with Amanda on guard duty. They rolled out of the armory in formation, a caravan of survivors heading home with enough supplies to change everything. They made it about 3 miles before running into the herd. It wasn't the group Marcus had seen last night, it was way bigger, hundreds of infected filling the street ahead like a rotting river. The radio exploded with chatter. "Herd, 12 o'clock. Too many to punch through. Alternate route, go west." Morrison's voice cut through the panic, calm and commanding. "All vehicles, follow the bus. We're taking Riverside Avenue, then cutting north on 5th, stay together, stay moving. If anyone breaks down, we don't stop. We send back help after we're secure." It was harsh, but necessary. Stopping in the middle of a herd was suicide. The bus's reinforced plow did its job, smashing through the infected that didn't get out of the way, leaving a trail of broken bodies. But more kept coming, drawn by the noise, and Marcus could see them pressing in from side streets, from buildings, from everywhere. The panel van shook as infected threw themselves at it, hands clawing at the reinforced windows, faces pressing against the glass with milky eyes and snapping jaws. Amanda was firing through the gun ports Marcus had added, careful headshots that dropped the closest threats. "We got a runner," she shouted, and Marcus saw it in the mirror, one of the fresh infected, sprinting at full speed, gaining on them. It leaped onto the van's back door, and Marcus heard the metal groan under the impact. "Hold on!" Marcus shouted, and he cranked the wheel hard left then right, swerving to shake the infected off. It worked, the thing flew off and tumbled under the wheels of the pursuing horde. But the maneuver cost them speed, and more infected were closing in. The radio crackled. "Panel van, you good?" Morrison's voice. Marcus grabbed the handset. "We're okay, couple hitchhikers, but Amanda's handling it." "Keep moving." And they did, the convoy pushing through side streets and residential areas, leaving infected in their wake. Marcus's hands were white-knuckled on the wheel, every muscle tensed, but the van's engine, the engine he'd rebuilt with his own hands, purred like a dream, never missing a beat. They burst out of the heaviest part of the herd and into a clearer area, and Morrison gave the order to punch it. The vehicles accelerated, racing down Riverside Avenue with infected giving chase but falling behind. Fort Ironside came into view, beautiful, safe, home, and the gates were already rolling open. The convoy thundered through and the gates slammed shut behind them, leaving the infected to pile up uselessly against the reinforced fence. Marcus pulled the van to a stop and just sat there for a moment, hands shaking, heart pounding, alive. They'd done it. They'd actually done it. The celebration that night was something Marcus would remember for the rest of his life. Someone had found a case of beer in one of the abandoned warehouses nearby, and while it was warm and probably past its best-by date, nobody cared. People laughed and hugged and cried with relief, passing around bottles and telling stories about the mission, embellishing the danger and their heroics in equal measure. Morrison stood on her platform again and raised her beer. "To the team," she called out, and 74 voices, 74 survivors who'd beaten the odds for another day, echoed back. "To the team." Marcus found himself pulled into a hug by Derek, then Amanda, then people he barely knew, all grateful that the mission had succeeded. But later, when the celebration died down and people drifted to sleep, Marcus found Morrison standing on the catwalk, looking out at the city beyond the fence. He climbed up to join her. "Can't sleep?" he asked. She shook her head. "Thinking about that herd you saw. About what it means." Marcus leaned against the railing beside her. "It means they're more dangerous than we thought. That they're organizing somehow." Morrison nodded. "It also means we're running out of time. If the infected are forming into massive groups, sweeping through areas, we can't just hide behind walls anymore. We need to be ready to move, to adapt, to maybe even fight back." "Fight back?" Marcus echoed. "Against hundreds of those things? Thousands?" Morrison looked at him, and in her eyes, Marcus saw determination that bordered on crazy. "We survived the initial outbreak. We built this place from nothing. We raided a military armory and came back alive. Why not? Why couldn't we fight back, clear zones, reclaim territory? We've got the weapons now, the supplies. We've got people willing to fight for a future." It was insane. It was ambitious. It was exactly what Marcus needed to hear. "You really think we can?" he asked. Morrison smiled. "I think we have to try. Because the alternative is waiting here until supplies run out again, until the infected breach the walls, until we're backed into a corner with no way out. I'd rather go down fighting to build something than hiding and waiting to die." Marcus thought about that, looked out at the dark city full of dead things, then back at Fort Ironside with its fires and its people and its fragile hope. "Okay," he said finally. "So what's the plan?" And that was when Morrison pulled out another map, this one marked with targets, police stations, hardware stores, pharmacies, other places that might have supplies or survivors. "We start small," she said. "Scouting runs, quick in and out missions to gather intel and supplies. We learn the infected's patterns, figure out how they move, where they concentrate. We build our strength, train more people in combat and tactics. And then..." She pointed to a spot on the map, downtown where the outbreak had started. "Then we go to the source. We figure out what's causing this, if there's any way to stop it, or at least any way to carve out a safe territory where people can actually live." It was a long-term plan, maybe a multi-year plan, and Marcus had no idea if they'd survive long enough to see it through. But it was a plan, a purpose, something more than just day-to-day survival. "You'll need vehicles," he said, slipping into his mechanic's mindset. "Good ones, specialized ones. Scout cars that are fast and quiet, armored transports that can take a beating, maybe even something we can weaponize." Morrison grinned. "I was hoping you'd say that. How do you feel about building a war fleet?" Marcus grinned back. "I feel like you're crazy, Colonel. But what the hell, everyone worth knowing is a little crazy these days. Let's build a war fleet." The weeks that followed were a blur of activity. Fort Ironside transformed from a refugee camp into something resembling a military base. Morrison organized the survivors into teams: combat, engineering, medical, agriculture, intelligence. Everyone had a role, everyone contributed. Marcus's engineering team grew to a dozen people, all working on vehicles and fortifications. They stripped down the school bus and rebuilt it as a troop transport with gun ports and reinforced armor. They modified motorcycles for fast scouting runs, adding quiet mufflers and storage for supplies. They even started work on what Derek jokingly called the Beast, a semi-truck they were converting into a mobile command center with living quarters, communications equipment, and enough armor to drive through hell itself. Jake Rodriguez ran combat drills every morning, training volunteers in firearms, melee combat, and squad tactics. Even the people who wouldn't go on missions learned to defend the fort, to shoot straight, to work together. Lisa Patterson set up a proper medical bay with the supplies from the armory, and the former nurse Marcus had brought on the supply run, her name was Rachel Kim, trained a team of medics. Tommy Baker built a radio monitoring station and started mapping out other survivor groups, making contact when possible, gathering information about the infected's movements. Fort Ironside stopped being just a place people hid and became a place people fought from. The scouting mission started small, just like Morrison had planned. 2-person teams on motorcycles, running quick loops through the surrounding area, mapping safe routes and danger zones, marking locations of interest. They found a pharmacy that was mostly intact and brought back medications. They found a sporting goods store and grabbed camping equipment, boots, warm clothes. Each mission added to their supplies and their knowledge. The infected were less active during the day, Marcus learned, slower and more easily avoided. But at night, they became aggressive, drawn to light and sound. The herds they'd seen were real, massive groups that moved through the city on irregular patterns, clearing out entire neighborhoods. One scouting team, 2 women named Carla and Jennifer, reported finding other survivors holed up in an apartment complex about 5 miles east. Morrison immediately authorized a rescue mission, and Marcus drove the armored truck with Jake and a combat team. They found 12 people, emaciated and terrified, who'd been surviving on rainwater and whatever they could scavenge from nearby apartments. Bringing them back to Fort Ironside felt good, felt like they were actually making a difference. The population swelled to 86, then 92 as more scouting teams found more survivors. Each new person was a victory, proof that humanity wasn't done yet. But not every mission went smoothly. 3 weeks after the armory raid, a supply run to a warehouse district went bad when the team triggered some kind of alarm and drew a herd. They made it back alive but lost one of the pickup trucks when its engine died, bad fuel, something Marcus couldn't have predicted or prevented. Worse, they lost a person. A guy named Michael who'd been a teacher, who'd volunteered because he wanted to help, got pulled from the truck when the infected swarmed it. The team had to leave him, had to drive away with his screams echoing in their ears. It was the first death since Marcus had arrived at Fort Ironside, and it hit everyone hard. Morrison called a meeting that night, and her face was drawn with grief and exhaustion. Michael knew the risks, she said, though her voice cracked slightly. He chose to go, chose to help. The best way we can honor him is to keep going, to make sure his death meant something. They held a memorial service, no body to bury, but they planted a tree in the compound's garden area and put up a marker with his name. Marcus stood with the other survivors and felt the weight of it, the fragility of what they were building. One mistake, one moment of bad luck, and any of them could be gone. But giving up, hiding, waiting, that wasn't living. That was just dying slowly. 2 months after Marcus had stumbled into Fort Ironside with nothing but a tire iron and hope, he stood in the garage and looked at what they'd built. A fleet of modified vehicles, each one specialized and maintained to perfection. A community of nearly 100 survivors, organized and trained and committed to rebuilding. Supplies stockpiled for months, maybe a year if they rationed. Defenses that had held against every herd that passed by. It wasn't much, not compared to the world before, but it was something. It was humanity fighting back. Morrison found him there, covered in grease as usual, tuning the engine on one of the scout bikes. "You got a minute?" she asked, and Marcus wiped his hands on a rag. "For you, Colonel." "Always." She smiled at that, but her expression was serious. "I'm planning the big one, Marcus. The mission downtown to the outbreak's origin point. I want to take a large team, multiple vehicles, enough firepower to fight through whatever we find there. And I want you with us. I know I said you were too valuable to risk, but I need your expertise with the vehicles, and I need someone I can trust if things go sideways." Marcus had known this was coming, had been preparing himself for it. Downtown was a death trap, everyone knew it. The infected population there was massive, and who knew what else they'd find. But Morrison was right, they needed answers, needed to understand what they were fighting. "When do we leave?" Marcus asked, and Morrison's smile widened. 3 days. That gives us time to prep, to make sure everyone knows the plan, to say goodbyes just in case. 3 days. 72 hours to get ready for the most dangerous mission they'd ever attempted. Marcus nodded slowly. "I'll get the vehicles ready. You just make sure we've got a plan that doesn't get us all killed." Morrison clasped his shoulder. "No promises, but I'll do my best." The next 3 days were intense. Marcus worked around the clock with his team, making sure every vehicle was in perfect condition. They'd take the Beast, the armored semi that was finally ready for field testing, as the command vehicle and troop transport. 2 scout bikes for fast reconnaissance. The armored bank truck for heavy combat. And the panel van as a backup and medical transport. 5 vehicles, 15 people including Marcus, Morrison, Jake, Tommy, Lisa, and 10 others who'd proven themselves on previous missions. They loaded weapons, supplies, medical equipment, communication gear, everything they might need. The night before the mission, Fort Ironside held another gathering, quieter than the celebration weeks ago. People knew the risks, knew that some of the team might not come back. Marcus found himself shaking hands with people he'd lived and worked beside, making promises to return that he hoped he could keep. Dawn came cold and clear. The mission team gathered in the garage, checking gear one last time. Morrison gave a brief speech about courage and purpose and humanity's resilience, and then they were loading into vehicles, engines starting, gates opening. Marcus took the wheel of the panel van with Rachel Kim riding as medic and another survivor named Chris handling weapons. As they pulled out of Fort Ironside, Marcus looked back at the place that had become his home, at the people who'd become his family, and silently promised he'd see them again. Then he faced forward, toward the city center, toward the unknown, and pressed the accelerator. The world might have gone to hell, but Marcus Williams, regular mechanic, regular guy, was going to fight like hell to take some of it back. The dead had their time. Now it was time for the living to remind them who this world really belonged to.